Hey, beloved, welcome back. Today, I thought we'd talk about getting to know you because you're kind of awesome. So, we're going to talk about personality and all kinds of things like that. I think it's going to be super fun. But first, if we haven't met yet, hi again. My name is Courtney Louie, and I'm a personality geek. I love exploring personality because I think it provides so much insight into who you are, why you do what you do, and also can help you be more effective, like how you manage your time and energy, what you focus on, and what you give yourself the grace to not focus on. So anyway, a big reason I thought it'd be fun to talk about getting to know you is because honestly, isn't that one of the most fun and kind of terrifying questions that comes up in job interviews, on dates, when you're getting to know a new group of people, when you're giving presentations, sometimes staff meetings, all those kinds of places. It's something that comes up. Let's get to know you. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Hopefully, though, this will be far more low key since it's mostly just me talking and you get to enjoy. So, um, and by the way, if you are popping on, it'd be awesome to have you on. Feel free to comment where you're coming from. That'd be really cool. I live in Arizona, so are you living somewhere where it's snowy or sunny? Because we don't have snow in this part of the Phoenix metro. Hmm. It looks like I'm having some video problems, so just a moment. We'll see if it works. We'll let it run. So let's talk about personality. And I thought it'd be really helpful to consider what the heck is personality. So, according to dictionary.com, personality is a combination of characteristics or qualities that form an individual's distinctive character. So that sounds really cool, right? But basically, another way you can look at it is your personality is your nature, your disposition, your temperament, your persona, your psyche, your identity. There's all kinds of different things we can put into it. But basically, in a nutshell, it's a modge podge of all the different qualities that make up you, which is really cool. And a big thing that I love how your Enneagram coach talks about it is your personality is never intended to be used as a weapon to beat people down with or a shield for a reason you won't grow. So it's not intended to be an excuse for reasons you can't grow or like, well, I'm just this way, so sucks for you. That's not really how it works. And another thing I briefly want to talk about with personality, and I promise we'll move on, is that there's so many different personality assessments out there. So many, and they all focus on different aspects. Some are research based, some are BuzzFeed, which is not quite the same thing. There's a really wide spectrum. And so that's just a really important thing if you're interested in taking a personality assessment to really just be clear what you're getting into. Because, for instance, there's ones that help you with your organizational style. That's cool. I'm on a style track, your style, personality, how you like to dress yourself. There's about your aura, woo woo. There's also like the Enneagram, which is about your motivations, what drives you. That's cool. Or there's also my favorite, the Myers Briggs Typology Indicator, or the MBTI. I'm actually certified in it, so again, very biased about it. It's research based, and that gets me excited. But there's all kinds of different personality assessments out there. So if you ever decide to take one or you have taken one, just be aware of what you're getting into so you're not surprised when at the end of it, it didn't tell you, how to fix all your problems. Because they can't do that. They're not God, thank goodness. So I thought it would be fun. So there's a brief overview about personality to actually talk about the different functions about the Myers-Briggs typology indicator, or I'll just shorten it, MBTI, moving forward, and how those work. Because also that's one of the fun things about getting to know yourself is understanding what lights you up. And I guess what we could also say, what kind of dims that flame. So basically, your personality affects what world you live in, not just literally Earth, how you see the world around you, how you make decisions, and whether you prefer freedom or organization in your world. And it's not just about how you organize your closet. So I also wrote about this, so I'm going to be looking back and forth. That's my notes. So there we go. So a really cool thing about most personality models, and especially with MBTI, is that it's on a spectrum. So for instance, we'll talk about the 4 big pieces of MBTI, and then maybe you can type yourself a little bit. Low-key typing. So for instance, We have introversion and extroversion. So I know it's not uncommon for someone to be like, oh, I was feeling really introverted, so I stayed home on the couch. That's not how introversion works. It's not about your laziness or whether you like people or not or like to talk a lot. It really has to do with what tends to energize you. So really, introversion and extroversion, and there's a spectrum. So you could, let's say extroversion is here, introversion is there. It really depends on where you fall on the spectrum. You might be someone who kind of, rides the line in some areas of your life, and then in others, you might be more to one side or the other. So introversion and extroversion refers to which world you tend to gravitate toward. Either the inner world, which is introversion, you tend to be more energized by having time to yourself, or the outer world, extroversion. So, for instance, for introverts, the inner world, the world inside themselves, is the real world, the world that really matters, where they like to live in the most. And also, they clearly live in the world around us, otherwise we wouldn't see it as introverts. So, again, it's a spectrum. For extroverts, the external world is the world outside them, what they see, what they can observe. That's the real world. And that's a really great description from Personality Hacker. That book is boss. Check it out. And in a nutshell, introverts tend to check in with themselves first before they speak or take action. Like a question you might ask is, does this resonate internally? Or, for instance, maybe in a little more layman terms, how do I feel about this? What do I think about this? Whereas extroverts tend to speak or act first. So once they put it out there, they get action in motion, they start talking. That's often where they actually clarify, okay, this is where I'm at, this is how I'm doing. So they might be more verbal processors, like to talk things through with others. So to step it back a little bit, introversion and extroversion really have to do with what world you like to live in, and it also affects what energizes you. If you're an introvert or lean toward introversion, again, it's a spectrum. You're not black and white, one or the other typically. You might check in with yourself more first before you say something or take action. And like, how do I feel about this? What do I think about this? Whereas extroverts tend to speak or act first. They like to get moving, they like to speak out loud, process that way. So when you have an idea of what world you kind of tend to live in, that can also affect how you approach your decisions. Maybe you realize that you need to give yourself a little more grace and space to make big deal decisions than perhaps your buddy who is a big extrovert. Whereas perhaps, let's say you're an extrovert and you realize that you like to move and experiment, maybe that means you need to give yourself some space. Again, I like white space, some space to process out loud, to experiment, to play with things before you commit to something fully. So another piece of the puzzle that I think is really exciting, it's my favorite, is how do you see the world? And so again, all of them are on the spectrum, sensing and intuition. And you can't function without using both in some form of your life. And you might tend to live in one area of that house more. So if you have sensing preferences, you pay more attention to what you can observe through the five senses. So what am I seeing, hearing, tasting, I'm going to stick out my tongue, touching, or smelling? So you tend to really notice those concrete details around you. You're hyper attuned to it. So you're more apt to remember events as they actually happened. You prefer to solve problems by working through facts first, and you like to focus on the details before you form the big picture. And you tend to trust your experiences. So, like the saying, you're more apt to see the trees before you see the forest. Whereas if you tend to lead with intuitive preferences, you tend to see patterns and possibilities through the information you're taking in. It's less concrete and abstract. You're more apt to remember events by the meaning, the essence of what you remember about them. You prefer to solve problems by exploring ideas, possibilities. You tend to focus on the big picture first and then dig into the details. And then you tend to trust your ideas more than actual experience. So those who lead with intuition are more apt to see the forest before you see the trees. So I'm going to step back a little bit. Briefly, when it comes to personality, I love the illustration of a house. So wherever you live, most often you have a bathroom. You might have a bedroom, a living space, a kitchen. We'll just go with those rooms. And you're going to spend time in each of those rooms throughout the day, right? Like, ideally, you do go to sleep sometimes. And most of us spend more time in the bathroom than perhaps they'd want to. But you end up spending spaces in all those rooms. but often you tend to gravitate toward one room more than the other. Perhaps you love the kitchen and you tend to find yourself spending a lot more time there preparing food, maybe you're meal planning, whatever those things are. So that's one of your preferred zones. So it's kind of how personality works. Often you have a preferred place you tend to live in. So, for instance, I lead with intuition, and that doesn't mean I don't use sensing. I clearly have to use sensing to make decisions on a day to day basis, but I prefer to live in my intuition room, we'll say that, versus in the sensing spaces. So, that can be sometimes a little bit helpful when you think about as you get to know yourself and learn more about yourself. More likely than not, your personality is on a spectrum. It's likely not black or white. You're in one or the other. More often than not, you're probably flowing through both. But where do you tend to gravitate more toward? So if you've got questions or comments, please feel free to pop that on in the comments because I can geek out about this all day long. So we've got two more questions I'll walk through and then we'll step it back a little bit. So the next part within MBTI is basically how do you make decisions? In essence, that's either thinking or feeling. And that does not mean that if you lead with thinking, you're purely logical, you have no emotions. And neither does it mean that if you lead with feeling, you're totally emotional, you can't use logic to make decisions or even think about things. That's called stereotyping, and that's not helpful. So instead, if you have thinking preferences, you tend to make decisions based on the basic truth or principle, regardless of the situation involved. So you like to make decisions with your head and want to be fair. You analyze circumstances using pros and cons. You prioritize telling the truth over being tactful, and you strive to be impersonal in making decisions. It doesn't mean you don't have emotions. It just means you tend to have a more objective perspective and really want to be able to, I guess, in many ways, you focus on fairness over how someone feels about it. Now, if you have feeling preferences, you tend to make decisions using personal, human based considerations. You tend to consider the impact on people first. You like to make decisions using your heart and want to be compassionate. You weigh what people care about and consider various points of view involved in situations. You tend to prefer to be tactful over telling the cold truth. Jump ahead. And you strive to establish or maintain harmony. Again, you need both of those functions. For instance, let's say as a parent, you need to be able to use fairness and compassion. It's not like you don't use both of those in your decisions as you discipline your child, but you're going to likely lean toward one side of the spectrum than the other, and that's totally cool. And then the last question is, do you want freedom or organization? In essence, that means judging and perceiving. And really what it means is, so if you lead with judging preferences, you tend to organize your outer world to allow inner world freedom. So when your space is organized, when it's not crazy cluttered, you tend to feel more at rest and be able to organize your thoughts. Visually, the space around you does affect how you feel internally. And if you lead with perceiving preferences, you tend to have a highly organized internal world of thoughts and feelings. Since you have such an organized mind, you don't necessarily find that as important to organize your external spaces. It doesn't mean that if you lead with judging, oh, I'm a total neat freak, or that if you lead with perceiving, you're a total sloth. It doesn't work that way, and that's great. But basically, the idea is how your environment, how you set it up, may impact how you're able to process things. And then the idea is when you put it all together, thinking about those questions, we're going to do a quick recap. You have a better idea of who you are. And again, this is just a live, can only do so much in live. So first, asking yourself, what world do you tend to live in? Do you tend to live in your inner world or tend to feel like live more in the outer world, noticing what's around you more? How do you see the world? Question 2. So do you tend to notice the concrete information, the 5 senses, sensing, or do you tend to live in the world of ideas, like intuition? Third question, how do you make decisions? Do you tend to make decisions from a more factual, truth-oriented space, or which would be thinking, or do you tend to make decisions based more on how this will impact others, feeling? And then the last one, 4, do you want freedom or organization? So how do you organize your your mind, and your external world. Again, that's really tricky to describe in a short live, but they're really fun questions. I would love to talk more about that with you. So getting to know those questions can be really helpful, and I can pop on and do another one of these, a deep dive. I think it'd be really fun. But in the meantime, think about those questions. I can pop a link to the article that has more in depth, like walking you through this. And in the meantime, feel free to pop on replay if you're watching this at replay, and or popping on what questions you have about how to get to know yourself. So I will be back tomorrow with day 8 of the challenge. I may go rogue again. We'll find out. I'm so glad you joined me. I hope you have a wonderful day. And as always, you can live intentionally with passion and purpose as God's beloved. See you later.